This podcast series is supported by members at Patreon. If you want to support this podcast series, head to patreon.com/Cascadian Beer. It may take a while, but through a lot of hard work and experience, you can eventually open your own brewery. Welcome to the Cascadian Beer Podcast. My name's Aaron, and I'm a Cascadian. I have a background in radio and television broadcasting. I'm a music producer, and I have a passion for beer. I don't consider myself to be an expert in beer by any means, but I do enjoy and respect the craft and the passion of these brewmasters. I want to learn from these pioneers on what sets them apart from the rest, and why they choose to call Cascadia their home. Cascadia is a bioregion in the Pacific Northwest on the North American continent. It is made up of the U.S. states of Washington and Oregon, as well as the Canadian province of British Columbia. In this podcast series, I'll be profiling the unique breweries of Cascadia, a region that has a strong presence on the international beer scene. In this episode, I'm very excited to be in Portland, Oregon, visiting Ecliptic Brewing. John Harris is a bit of a legend in Oregon craft beer history, known for having a hand in creating the well-known Pacific Northwest staple beers from Deschutes Brewing, such as Mere Pond, Black Butte Porter, and many others. After 20 years as brewmaster at Sail Brewing Company, John decided it was time for him to start his own brewery from the ground up in 2013.
My name is John Harris. I'm the owner and brewmaster here at Ecliptic.
And how long have you been open for?
Ecliptic's been open for just a little over 3 years now.
Right, but this isn't your first venture into beer. You kind of have a bit of a history with beer. How did beer initially find you?
How did beer find me? Good point. Well, the first good beer found me in college. We'll just leave it right there. Mm-hmm. I was 21. Anyhow, I'd been, tasting beers, and beer was always just kind of like that flavor you got used to. You know what I mean? The guy turned me on to some German beer, and I was like, wow, this thing tastes much different than that other stuff I've been drinking, and kind of found that the whole craft, this was in the mid 80s, and the whole craft beer industry was just starting to, we called it microbrews back then. The microbrews were coming out, and there was Widmer and Bridgeport, at that point, Grants and Red Hook out of Washington. And I was trying the new beers, and wow, these things just taste kind of interesting and different. And so I was watching the scene. I did a little home brewing, started reading about beer, and basically, landed a job that I had in the paper, the Willamette Week, that said, the same Willamette Week, it's still here, still the same. Anyhow, it said brewer needed Hillsdale Brewpub, and Hillsdale was McMenamins pub, and they just put a brewery into it. It was actually the first brew pub in Oregon ever was Hillsdale, of actual brewing and selling on the same premises. Widmer and Bridgeport predate that, but they were just making beer and selling it to bars. But anyhow, basically I went and answered this ad and got a phone call. Said, call me back in 2 weeks. And I called him back and got hired to be a brewer. And I was like, wow, oh gosh, I need to really start boning up on my stuff. And,
well, were you homebrewing at that point?
I was doing a little homebrewing, yeah. I mean, Charlie Papazian's book had just come out, The Complete Joy of Homebrewing. So that kind of revolutionized homebrewing, because it really took it down to the common, really just the simple things you had to do to make a homebrew. It tastes good. And so I did that. I've been reading that book and Michael Jackson's books. But to make a long story short, Hillsdale Brewpub hired me to be a brewer. I was kind of like, wow, this is crazy. So I quit my job, gave my notice, and went to work at the Hillsdale Brewpub in 1986. And that was about 6 months after they converted it into a brewery. At that point, Portland Brewing had just opened. So there was like 4 breweries in Portland at that point. So now there's like, I don't know how many, 80, something like that, you know? That's where I got my start, was with the McMenamins, and I worked between 2 different breweries with those guys. We had the Hillsdale Brewpub and then the Cornelius Pass Roadhouse Brewery, which opened about 3 months after I started at Hillsdale. So I worked at both places through my time at McMenamins.
And then from there, how did you end up at Deschutes?
I left my job at McMenamins and got laid off, honestly. And I was working with another guy in Bend to get a brewery going over there. After a while, it became apparent he didn't really have we didn't have the financing to do it. And at that point, I'd been out of work for like 3 months, and I was like, I need a friggin' job. I can't be on unemployment anymore. After we determined that we couldn't do a project together, there had been an ad running in the Oregonian that said brewer needed Deschutes Brewery and Pub, Bend, Oregon. And I kind of, the ad kind of glowed out of the paper at me, to be honest with you. It was like, well, that's really the job you're looking for, you know. You got to move to Bend, but that's the opportunity you're looking for me at least, to get into a brewery that's set up right. And so this guy walked out of my apartment. I picked up the phone, called down to Bend, and 2 days later I was going down for an interview. And I kind of was exactly what the owner, Gary Fish, was looking for. He wanted somebody with some experience. He didn't want somebody who had just, you know, gone out of brewing school at UC Davis or something and had read all the books and knew all the math. He wanted somebody who actually had made beer. So and at this point in 1988, 2 years of experience was a lot in this industry. And so what the most beer you could have is maybe 4 to 8, you know, because Sierra Nevada opened in 1980. But anyhow, make a long story short, I got hired to be the first brewer at Deschutes. And actually the first brewer ever in Bend, Oregon, which I found out after this guy wrote a book about the history of Bend and brewing in Bend, and found that there was nothing before Deschutes that happened except for a brewery in Prineville. Right. So I went down there in 88, worked there for 4 years, working for those guys, just really got the brewery going. We got the distribution piece going, started getting the beers out like Maripon and Black Butte, and then Porter, and then Obsidian Stout and Jubilee are the 4 beers that are still kind of around that I had my hand in at one point.
Yeah, because those kind of are the staples that I know of the Pacific Northwest. When I think of the Deschutes beer, are those ones that are still around today.
Yeah, those are definitely their old core beers. I think a lot more IPAs they're doing nowadays too, these days. But but IPA's king, so that's why everybody's doing IPAs. You know, we have 2 IPAs ourselves. You know. Yeah. But I spent 4 years with those guys, and my other parts of my life, like by the way, who would become my wife. The Ben didn't really work for her, so I was friends with the people at Full Sail, and they knew of my predicament where she was going to move back to Portland, or was I going to move back? And I got offered a job by them to run their new brewery they're going to open in Portland called the River Place Brewery, which was going to be a small batch place. It was going to be like hands off. You just run this thing for us? And so I decided, and at that point also, we started talking at Deschutes about how we need to build a bigger brewery, and I really felt that. But this opportunity came up, it was the time to go, because I couldn't get much further into the planning of this new brewery at Deschutes and just jettison right before we did it. So it all kind of lined up with a job back in Portland. So I quit my job at Deschutes and headed back to Portland. So then I went to work for Full Sail. My job with them is multifaceted. I learned a lot about the whole beer business from them. Just the sense that we had a brewery, ran the brewery, we made beer, created beer, got the beer out for sale. But also I worked a lot with our distributors. Lots of trainings. I was like the traveling brewmaster, so I spent a lot of time in all of our markets just talking about our beer and how we make beer, and really got to see the distribution side a lot. So that's really helped me, I think, launch Ecliptic. Was I had a really solid basis of the entire industry, from how you sell beer. I mean, I'd go out and sell beer too. So it was like how to talk to accounts, how to talk to distributors, how to make good beer, how to make consistent beer, and all that stuff. So I really felt like I had a nice bit of knowledge before I started this Ecliptic Brewing. Yeah.
So when did the idea for this project develop in your mind? Was it a few years from there to actually opening, or was it a kind of a quick turnaround?
Oh, well, I mean, it's safe to say that I started thinking about having my own brewery, you know, right when I first started brewing. You know, I mean, if you talk to most brewers, they all have a desire to make their own beer, to craft their own beer. It really is an artisan, very scientifically artisan, crafty thing. I mean, you know, beer is a consumable. So just like a good cook in a kitchen and a good chef can take things and make it taste great, the same thing goes with beer. So I found an affinity to that so early on that I was able to make high quality beer. And so, you know, at different times when Full Sail was getting sold in the late 90s, I thought about it, but it ended up becoming employee owned, and we weren't sure if we were all going to keep our jobs at Full Sail. So the idea came up like, was this the time to do it? And I had just had a baby, and it just wasn't the time.
Yeah.
So, no, at a certain point I was, approaching 50 years old. I just started thinking about, what do I want to do? I mean, I've been at Full Sail for 20 years. You know, it's a long time. I've been brewing for, at that point, I guess 28 years. Kind of just trying to figure out, you know, what do I want to do? What do I want to... And I thought about all the beers that I haven't made yet that I always, in my head, wanted to make. So back when I started at McMenamins, the sky was the limit. You could do whatever you wanted to. I mean, really, realistically, they're like, break the boundaries. We brewed with fruit. People are like, how dare you brew with fruit? What the hell are you doing? This is stupid. Yeah. And they were actually, McMenamins was, as far as I know, the first brewery in America to brew with fruit, to the point where at one point the BATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, which governed them at that time, basically sent a letter that said, cease and desist. Fruit is not an allowable ingredient in beer. So we had to actually write a letter and get petition to have it become legal. So that's a little history piece for you there. But I always enjoyed brewing with fruit. And that was a thing that, I knew, you know, probably wasn't going to happen at Full Sail. I'm a creative person. So I really felt like, you know, I have all these beers I want to do. And through time, I met a couple guys who have money, and they were like, you know, if you ever do this, I'll support you. And so basically started thinking about it in the fall of 2011, decided in the spring of 2012, I quit my job. I realized if I was going to do this, I can't do it in shadows. I have to go out, find the money, find the building, just go all in. So quit my job at Full Sail, where I'd been for 20 years, and left basically with no income, and proceeded to go forward on the project. I started finding more people who wanted to give me money. I mean, it's just quite a process to get this thing going. I mean, first thing you have to do is find the money, and before you got to find enough money to sign a lease. And I basically signed the lease, and right after that, the last bit of money came in after I basically committed to lease this building for 10 years at X dollars per month with no income anyhow. So, but the whole process was I learned a lot. It took basically a year and a half to get open. It took 8 months to find a building, 4 more months to secure the building. And then once I got the lease, it took just a little bit over 6 months to build out. So I found this building here on Cook Street, and it's just a perfect building for a brewery. And I wanted to.
It's a big space.
Yeah, I wanted to have a restaurant to go with it. So we have room for that, parking lot, outdoor seating, room for brewery expansion. So we're going to fill this thing up pretty big next year, but we might be out of room then, but we'll see.
Right. So where does the name come from then? And then what is the kind of the story behind the beers that you want to create based off that name? Right.
So, you decide, okay, I'm going to open a brewery. Now I need a name. Then you think about, when I started, it was just about 3,000 breweries. Now there's 4,000 breweries in America. So astronomy is a hobby of mine. I enjoyed going out in the summertime, mostly summer, in the dark skies, and get my telescope and look at faint fuzzy objects in the sky and say, oh, it's a galaxy. That's pretty cool. So I knew I wanted to have an astronomy themed name because I wanted to have a tie into something, because you just learn more about things if you, we name a beer called, Orbiter IPA, for instance. It's like, what is Orbiter? Well, it's something that orbits a planet. What's a planet? What's a sun? What's all that stuff. So all the names are tied into an astronomy reference. The brewery's name itself, Ecliptic, is in reference to the ecliptic plane, where most of the planets travel around the sun and is kind of the same level at the same plane around the sun, except for Pluto, who's been kicked out as a planet anyway. So it was always not in the ecliptic plane. But so it kind of refers to our yearly journey around the sun on planet, on spaceship Earth. Ties into the seasonal beers you want to drink throughout the seasons. Like right now we're in winter. Thinking about drinking, Pilsners right now. You're thinking more about drinking strong, hearty ales right now. The snow on the ground out in Portland right now. And also tied into the restaurant, where we want to have seasonal menu items that tie into the different seasons and stuff. So the whole thing kind of revolves around ever-changing beer and ever-changing food in our restaurant.
Right. And so what beer are you most proud of to date that you've been able to create with your own project?
That's a hard question. Yeah. Just because we've done so many beers. I mean, we've done probably 60 beers here at least at this point. I don't want to be lame and say I can't really answer that, but that's just a really hard question.
How about favorite season then? Season for beers.
If I have to look at it, our Capella Porter, not the sexiest of beer styles, but won World Beer Cup gold. So I can't be not proud of that beer. That's the highest honor we've won so far on a national level. I mean, we've also won for our barley wines, our IPA Orbiter, and our Pilsner have garnered some medals, but probably the biggest one, I guess, if we look off just accolades, it'd probably be our Porter.
Mm-hmm. So when you opened, how long did it take for the community to kind of come and support you and kind of get your regulars through the door?
Oh, well, having brewed for X number of years, there was a little bit of, push behind the fact that I was opening a brewery. So I had a lot of, people waiting to come taste the beer and waiting to come taste the food when we opened up. So that was really helpful to not just be a startup with no known reputation. So we're pretty busy from the day one, and went through the usual startup blues, which is you're really, really super busy for about a month or two. Then of course, for us, that was mostly of November and December. Then January happens, and restaurant business just doesning do well in January. So we fell off. But no, we've been slowly growing our awareness here. We definitely have a bunch of regulars that come in, some of them every day. We have a great outdoor seating area that we've made better and better each year. And, it's a real good place just to hang with a great view of downtown Portland and a hot summer night. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. With the astronomy theme in mind, are you trying to incorporate kind of because there's another Oregon brewery that sent their own yeast into space and brought it back to do that. Do you have any way of trying to tie something from the cosmos into your beer, or is it just strictly seasonal stuff that you can get on Earth?
Right. Yeah. I was pretty upset when they did that. I let them know it too. I said, man, we're the space brewery, man. What are you doing? Like, no. We're the space brewery, man. You're trying to steal it. And he laughed. We all laughed. I thought that was pretty cool, actually. Actually, there's another business called Ecliptic, and they do basically cameras for NASA. Like when you see pictures of the rockets taking off, that's their camera, prior to, they could take all that heat and stress and stuff. So he came by one day because he was thought it was just great. There was another named Ecliptic and thought it was a brewer. That was a brewery. He said someday he's going to try to get my beer up in space. So I should actually call him about that because we haven't done it so far, but at one point the shuttle missions are over now, but he was going to try to get some of my beer up into space somehow. And we got to keep working on that. I think I should call him up, send him an email and say, what's up with that? You said you do this. Mm-hmm. It hasn't happened yet, but I know we like to say we're fresh from Earth. All of our products are fresh right here from Earth. So, not from Mars or Venus. So just make sure you know what planet you're on.
Yeah. You've done a couple of collaborations with some other breweries as well. The one that I had in particular was the one with Cigar City with apricots. How did that one come about?
Right. So before we opened, I did a few collaborations, but one I did was with Wayne Wombles from the Cigar City Brewery. So I actually flew to Tampa, where we brewed a beer we called Illuminating the Path. It was a beer we came up with using Pinot barrels to age a darker style beer with basically marionberries from Oregon, acacia berries, and then we used rose hips and I think it was orange peel, And so we brought a botanical and a fruit from Oregon and a botanical and a fruit from Tampa, brought those together, then aged it and released that right after we opened in January of 13. That came out. The whole idea was that Wayne would come here at some point and brew a beer. So during when the Craft Brewers Conference was here in 2015, he came in and we decided we wanted to make a lighter version of that. So we used basically a golden style ale. We used peaches and apricots, two fruits from Florida and Oregon, and then tied that in with some juniper and some hibiscus. Then we aged that in Sauvignon Blanc barrels. So that was called Eclipsing the Sun. So two different takes on this white wine and red wine kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. How many awards have you won for your beers? Because there's been quite a recognition for them as well, right?
Oh, at Ecliptic?
Yeah.
I guess, I don't know, I guess maybe about 10 awards now, which is pretty cool. Like I said, our barley wines, whether it be barrel aged or not barrel aged, have won 2 or 3 medals each. And then, like I said, our Pilsner or Orbiter IPA, and then the Porter so far, I think. Remember, we got them all on the wall out there. I can't remember them all.
Right.
But it's been pretty cool that we've slowly been able to get. I mean, I really, it's like we were a startup brewery. I mean, every brewery, even though I brewed for a long time, you're still a startup eventually, and you still got to work the bugs out of your system. You still have to say, oh, that extract didn't come out the way I wanted. I'm not getting the hop flavor I'm really looking for. Things like that you got to do to tweak your stuff, make sure you get your beer where you want it. So I think we came out with some really good beer when we first started, but I think we're making better beer now, just because I think you just get to know your system and what you're trying to do and what you're trying to say. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah, never stop learning. I always like to say, like, people like, what's your favorite brewery? And I say, well, Sierra Nevada, because they're just the granddaddy, and plus they've only gotten better. So I aspire to that, just to keep continuing getting better beer. A lot of people, as you get bigger and grow, like they're going to be almost 1 million barrels. It's like you think, how can you make the highest quality beer there? And they're probably, like I said, making the highest quality beer there. So we have about 995,000 barrels to go to beat them. We'll hit 5,000 barrels this year. So whatever that math is off 1 million, we got a long ways to go. I don't think we'll get there. I don't really have aspiration to get there.
All right. What's been your observation with the arc of the craft beer in Portland and Oregon in general? Because, I mean, you guys are kind of sitting at 50% market share now of beer sales in the state, right? So how have you been surprised at kind of the spike in recent years of interest in it? Or do you think it was kind of a natural progression that was meant to happen?
Yeah, I think that, Oregon itself has always had a strong buy Oregon first mentality, especially when the craft breweries started. That was like a mantra, and, buy Oregon fruits, buy Oregon vegetables, buy Oregon wines, and then it became buy Oregon beers. And I think
I remember those stickers coming down here on holidays. Yeah,
exactly. And so, I think that, you had that going for you. You had the pub culture that started with people like Don at the Horse Brass and John at Captain Ankeny's and the McMenamins brothers and the guys over at Produce Row that all kind of like said, yes, we're going to put your beer on tap. So you started seeing the imports get pushed out and the craft beers come in, which is kind of sad because some of the fresh Bass Ale was always pretty tasty. So I think that as the breweries have grown, I think that the market share has grown. So I think that like in 1987, when Full Sail started, they started bottling beer. They were the first ones to bottle beer. So some guy who's 24 has a family, starts bringing home 6-packs. And before you know it, his kid's 22, 15, sees dad and mom drinking craft beer. And I think that at this point with the craft beer industry, with Bridgeport at 32 years old in the state, you got some babies that are now 32 when this thing whole started. So I think that just a couple things. That was what was in the house. So if you say you stole a beer from your dad, you're not stealing a bud. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I shouldn't have said that. Anyhow,
you're not stealing.
My point is, I think that especially in Portland, as the market's grown, and I think it just that, when you have a flavorful craft made beer, it's hard to. There's a place for industrial lager. I'm not against it at all because that's a flavor that some people really like, and so. But just I think that once you have that other flavor and you get kind of hooked on it, and I think you'll see that. Especially with the newer generations, people in their lower 20s to low 30s, they're looking for something new. They're looking for a flavor. I remember being in Eugene at a tasting once and watch these 3 guys come in, and it looked just like college students, and they ended up picking out a 6.4 ounce bottle of beer. But they were like totally stoked to go drink it. They weren't like looking for a slammer 6-pack. These guys were like basically buying this really esoteric imported, really strong ale. But I thought it was pretty cool that, these guys are like taking it. That's like it was a $15 bottle of beer. It's like, I thought it was crazy, but I thought it was a sign of like people want quantity over quality. And I think that especially nowadays where people want to know where their food comes from, where their beer comes from, they want a story behind it more than it's just a beer. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. There's an actual person that's making that rather than unknown entity.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that we're just like all the breweries. I mean, there's so many breweries now in Portland, it's crazy. But I can only really count on like less than 2 hands how many have actually failed in the last 30 years. Some because they left town, some because they just didn't make it. Their concept just wasn't right. But Portland definitely embraces their breweries and supports them.
And so, who is inspiring you locally with their beer at the moment?
I'm good buddies with the Gigantic guys. I think they're doing some fun stuff. They're not afraid to throw up a big style, but also then throw up pale ale at you. It's like, that's some of the stuff their guys are doing. The guys up at Freem, guy who used to work with at Full Sail, they're doing some cool stuff. There's lots of people in town, to be honest with you. That's a hard question just because I get inspired by all of them. I mean, every once in a while you have a beer, be like, holy crap, what the hell did you do there?
Yeah.
That's a great idea,
What's your favorite beer that you make to pair with your favorite thing out of your kitchen?
When we have mussels on the menu, mussels with our Pilsner is really tasty, and also with our newer IPA called Starburst. It depends on what size of hop you want to go for, but if you want more the fruity tropical hop with a bit more intensity, you can go with the IPA, but with the classic pairing of mussels and, like if you went to Belgium or something with the Pils.
And if somebody was wanting to go down this path themselves of opening up their own brewery, what advice would you give them?
Don't do it. I mean, really think about what you're really wanting to do, because opening your own brewery doesn't mean you're going to be making beer necessarily all the time. I mean, it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to, like our goal was to open a brewery restaurant and then start distributing beer in bottles and kegs outside of the place. So the whole MO was to grow. And so now I have 5 brewers, and I I still brew occasionally, but at this point, the business has to be taken care of. And so I spend most of my days managing the business than actually managing the beer. Of course, there's other ways you could do that. You could hire someone to manage your business for you, but at some point you're going to have to pay them. And so at some point I'll have a CFO or controller probably, but right now that's me. And, but also just really realize you're not opening a brewery, you're opening a business. And those are 2 different things, because like you mentioned earlier, the guy opened a brewery in New Zealand that had never brewed a drop of beer. And he obviously didn't know how to run a business and didn't know how to make beer. So he's gone. So make sure you know what you're doing, because you are opening a business. You're not opening a brewery. And there's so many more layers of stuff that you just have no clue, that whether it be from compliance with government or state regulators or the national regulators or trying to source raw materials. I mean, I'm finally being able to get the hops I wanted to buy 3 years ago. And now I can finally get them. I couldn't get them 3 years ago for the prices they were asking. But now I'm actually able to get the Mosaic and the Simcoe and the Amarillo at reasonable prices. And if you make your beer, say your great homebrew recipes around this, say New Zealand hops, well, good luck, because they're just not available. But anyhow, just really think it through. I'd say if you're going to open up your own brewery, think through all of it. Not just what beer you're going to make, but how am I going to stay in business to make the beer? Because you have to have cash to pay your bills and to pay your employees, and hopefully have more at the end of the day than less.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, sure. You bet. Cheers.
Big thank you to John. I really appreciate him taking the time to speak with me, especially since it was a very busy day at the brewery as well. So I really appreciate his time. And you got to check out Ecliptic Brewing. If you're in Portland, you got to go by the brewery. It's an awesome space. There's a great tasting room. There's a great restaurant area, great food out of the kitchen. Really enjoyed my time while I was there. So go check it out. Ecliptic Brewing in Portland, Oregon. Thanks so much for listening. If you really like this independently produced podcast series, you can show your support by going to Patreon at patreon.com/Cascadian Beer. and pledging as little as $1 an episode. It really helps, and I really appreciate it too. Those people that are on my Patreon page in the moment, really appreciate the support. Thanks so much. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well at Cascadian Beer. And thanks so much for those of you who have been sharing these episodes as well. Really appreciate that. So if you really like this episode, please feel free to share it with your friends and let them know about this podcast series, the Cascadian Beer Podcast. And if you would like me to go chat to your favorite brewery, be sure to reach out to me on Facebook and Twitter, and I'll reach out to your favorite brewery and hopefully get them on the podcast series soon. So you never miss an episode, please subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a review. It really helps us get this series into as many ears as possible. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, remember, support your local.